ensues from his former membership and service as Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. He was also a founder of the National Association for the Advancement of White People, and now all America is saying, holy cow, can this be? What will happen if David Duke becomes governor of Louisiana? He wants you to know a lot of good things. Who will vote for David Duke? Let's start here for just give us a second, and when this audience will have a chance to get in. I heard you tell Larry King that Clarence Thomas's marriage to a white woman bothered you. That's the words you used. It bothered you. Why does it bother you?
Well, I said also that I support Clarence Thomas for the Supreme Court, but I answered honestly. I think intermarriage sometimes between blacks and whites often hurts the children. I think it does, and I think that most black people and most white people in America believe that way. I think a lot of people are afraid to say how they think about some of those issues. But I'm just honestly answering the question that they posed to me.
You probably believe in that answer, that you speak for a lot of people who are afraid to say so out loud.
A lot of people are afraid to talk about a lot of issues in this country. There's reverse discrimination going on.
You're foursquare against affirmative action, and in that speech...
I'm against discrimination. I believe equal rights must be for everybody in this country, black or white. And I think human rights must belong to all people.
Do you believe in... do you accept the phrase racial purity? Do you believe in that?
I don't think racial purity is a viable concept. I don't think there's any pure race. There are certainly races, and there's heritages that exist, and there's nothing wrong with black people being proud of their heritage and their race. There's nothing wrong with white people being proud of theirs. I think Jesse Jackson's proud of his people. I want to preserve the heritage of my society. I love the Western Christian civilization that we live in. And I'm concerned about the fact that we seem to be losing some of that heritage. In some schools in this country, you can't even sing Christmas carols anymore. And I don't think that's right.
I would like to show this audience your first visit to our program, Mr. Duke, which happened in 1968, a time when you were... I'm sorry, 78. This is 13 years ago. Here is David Duke on the Donahue Show in Chicago, Illinois, being introduced 13 years ago. Also here is David Duke. Mr. Duke is, what is your title?
Grand Wizard or National Director.
You are Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan.
Right.
He's such a nice-looking boy. You know what I mean. I don't mean to be flip about what
I know.
People are surprised, huh?
I guess so, because Hollywood's got this image that anybody who believes in their own race, if they're white and wants to preserve it and have their children go to decent schools and grow up believing in this country, they've got to somehow be old, they got to have a big beer belly, they got to be dirty, and I don't think that's the right image.
You don't even chew tobacco, huh, Mr. Duke?
No, a little spearmint juicy fruit once in a while.
There's nothing there you would disagree with today.
Not too much there, no. Black people, for a lot of the conditions in their communities. Now I blame the liberal social welfare system, which has encouraged illegitimacy. It's broken up black families. We really haven't, we've allowed drug dealers and drug pushers to control housing projects in this country. And I think liberalism has really damaged the black community and the white community as well in our society.
Yes. One of the bills, you introduced 7 bills while you were a member of the Louisiana legislature.
Yes.
Only one of which passed, which disallowed jurors in criminal trials from taking any money for their service. Well, that's a good idea. One that did not pass, you wanted to give welfare mothers $100 a year for having a Norplant contraceptive device surgically inserted. And for as long as the welfare mother retained this implant, she would receive $100 a year.
Actually, the bill in the final form simply gave a bonus for welfare mothers to abstain or simply to practice any kind of birth control, whether it be Norplant or the pill. I believe that the illegitimate welfare birth rate continues to oppress people. I think that when a mother has an illegitimate child, she has less opportunity for jobs and training. I think the taxpayers end up paying for it. Middle-class families have difficulty affording children of their own right now, and yet we're financing a very high illegitimate welfare birth rate. I think we need to encourage responsibility. And the bill had no mandatory provisions whatsoever. It simply tried to encourage welfare mothers and give them a little bit more money if they would be responsible in that area, and I think we've got to be. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got to do that in this country. That's the biggest problem this nation faces. So much of our crime comes from that element, a lot of our drug problems, our educational problems, and if middle-class working couples can be responsible and plan their families, why shouldn't we do that for welfare recipients as well?
The New Orleans, the Times-Picayune of New Orleans, no friend of yours. You've had your problems with this. This paper is foursquare against you. More than that, it's consistently against you in more than one editorial. The Times-Picayune does not want you to be the governor of Louisiana. No. Some of what they've reported include the following. A report that in December of 1980, you met with a chap by the name of Michael Perdue in a hotel in Louisiana and planned the shipment of 10 mercenaries to the island of Dominica to overthrow the island and establish white supremacist rule on this island, at which place your pal would establish gambling casinos and other money-making ventures. Now, you don't deny that, do you?
Oh, I absolutely deny that. That's not true at all. This fellow Perdue talked about the island of Grenada originally, which later the United States of America went in to overthrow the Marxist leader of that country. And there were anti-communists who were attempting to do that. And later these people talked about Dominica. But I had no part in that. In fact, they called me before the grand jury, and I testified. And
you took the Fifth Amendment before the grand jury.
Right, exactly right. I had no, there was no illegality whatsoever. There were no indictments and no accusations.
So there was a meeting then. You talked to this guy about this.
Mr. Perdue talked about overthrowing the communist government in Grenada. About a year and a half later, 2 years later, the United States government, under Ronald Reagan, went into Grenada and overthrew the communist regime. And
Duke was not arrested, but he was called before a grand jury. He took the Fifth Amendment, he said, refusing to testify on grounds he might acquit himself. Eventually, 9 of the 10 mercenaries who were recruited and the boat was provided were found guilty. It was called the Bayou of Pigs.
Bayou.
So what are we to understand here? That your cooperation with him was to overthrow the communists in Dominica?
Grenada was what they talked to me about.
So you were a part of then
I'm very anti-communist, and I'm for any movements around the world to overthrow communism, and I think that Castro should have been overthrown years ago. There have been many people who suffered in communist Cuba over the last 20 years, and any efforts to overthrow communism I've always supported and I will continue to support.
You do not deny selling Nazi literature out of your own legislative office while you served in the House.
Right, and I don't deny selling communist literature, but I'm very anti-communist. I had a bookstore, ladies and gentlemen, and every bookstore in New York sells, quote, Nazi literature and communist literature. I sold Christian literature.
Here are some of the titles it is alleged you are selling. From your office as a member of the Louisiana State Legislature, Zoological Subspecies of Man, Racial Differences Between Mental Growth and School Achievement, The Racial History of Scandinavia, and Did 6 Million Really Die? The Truth at Last.
Well, I believe
Vogue magazine, I should say, reports this, and the source for Vogue is Elizabeth Rickey, who's a member of the Republican State Committee.
It's absolutely true. I've sold all those books, and I believe in freedom of speech, and I think that people should be able to make their own minds up about every subject. I sold liberal books and conservative books. But it's a cheap shot to take a candidate for office and pick out a book that you don't like and say, he sold this book, therefore he believes in the book.
Do you think the Holocaust is exaggerated by Jews?
Of course there were terrible atrocities in Europe, and I condemn that. And there were terrible atrocities as well in the Soviet Union. And I oppose any oppression of people. And I think that there's a lot of... the closest thing that I know to the policies of Germany in this country is the so-called affirmative action or quota systems. They had quotas in Germany as well on the basis of race. I don't think you should have racial preference. You talked about one of my bills on Norplant. One of the bills I offered in the Louisiana legislature was to prohibit discrimination based on race, that a person be judged on the basis of their ability and their talents and not their racial background, and that's what I believe in.
Now, I know this is chasing you around everywhere you go, and I know you want to talk about issues.
Right.